City Engineering. Besides myself, you'll hear this evening from Tom Crowley, who's with our engineer Carollo, and David Barth, and then Monty Carnes will wrap it up for us. Additional team members here with us also are from city staff, Thomas Novotny and James Driscoll. Also with our engineer Carollo is Erica Cooper. And with our construction manager, Burns and McDonald, we have Ron Coker and Dave Kinchin. And I'll just add that the folks I just mentioned, along with a number of others, have put a lot of work into a short amount of time to get us to this point, and I really appreciate that. So what we want to do this evening is provide you an update on our work regarding the project definition related to assessing the long-term needs of the raw water delivery system and the water treatment system. And also to let you know where we're going, where we plan to go next. We will not ask for any action this evening. However, feel free to offer any input or guidance, and of course, ask questions anytime. We've tried to keep the presentation to a relatively high level to not take you into all the detail and weeds, but anything you hear that you want to hear more about, we're a bunch of engineers, so we'll go as deep as you want. In talking about the treatment and raw water systems, Monty has mentioned previously that we're at an inflection point regarding our drinking water systems. So this chart kind of puts that decision into context. As in the late 1970s, the community made a decision to invest in Kaw Lake and in the future. And this chart illustrates the growth between 1970 and 2020. And the dashed horizontal line represents the maximum capacity of the water sources that Stillwater had in the 70s. Now, I don't know precisely what that number is, but we've, looked at it enough, the sources at the time were Lake Carl Blackwell and Lake Mcmurtry. And we can say, definitively that maximum population served was no bigger than 40,000. So you can see from the chart that Stillwater absolutely could not have become what it is today without Kaw Lake. And, moving from that investment in the late 70s, early 80s to the current inflection point and opportunity for investment. This time it relates to how we maintain and renew that critical infrastructure. Do we continue to repair and rehabilitate and upgrade as needed? Being aware that you can only repair things for so long. Eventually you have to replace them. Or do we take this opportunity to address the aging infrastructure, changing water treatment standards, economic growth on current and future, and system resiliency to address those things with a planning effort. So we believe that by deciding the most cost-effective approach to managing our assets with a long-term action plan to meet the community's needs is what's called for at this time, and that's what we've been working on. And I want to give you an example of what I mean about a long-term action plan. As I've said, and we all know, someday we'll have to replace the Kaw pipeline, either due to its condition or its capacity. And so that would cost, and if we did it today, that would cost in the hundreds of millions. But what if we could do some things to mitigate those concerns about condition and capacity? That is, make it possible to take the pipeline out of service to make a planned or an emergency repair, or to make it possible to store additional raw water closer to Stillwater that we could fill in times of low demand and have available in times of higher demand. So variations on those two sorts of actions can make a big decision while they can extend the life of the pipeline. And so they can make a big impact on when we have to spend those hundreds of millions. Here on this slide, Just wanted to show you some example regional communities that are facing similar decisions and are at various stages of their processes, but we're certainly not alone. And, you know, through the years, we've talked numerous times about renewing our water and wastewater infrastructure, and this is kind of building on that discussion, that these other communities, they're all doing the same thing. That's not a complete list, just an illustration of ones that we knew, you know, collectively off the top of our heads had similar stuff, type projects going on. Also, here on this slide, I want to just demonstrate how for over a decade, you know, we've been making critical system improvements, both at the water treatment plant and with the CAW raw water delivery system. I've highlighted some of the key ones there in bold, but you can see it's an ongoing process, and also, maybe not observed from the list, but from our experience, know that the operation and maintenance and the major needs that we have to address, you know, they get more and more frequent as the infrastructure ages, and they get more and more expensive. So those together kind of bring us to the stage we're at now, what we've been calling project definition. Spring of 2020 is when we were working on a program of probably $50 million worth of improvements at the water treatment plant. And that's when Monty said, hey, this asset we're investing that much in is 40 years old. It's time to step back, look at the longer view, and maybe we're on the right track, but we should, you know, take a longer view and make sure we're on the right track. So that started spring of 2020. We visited you all in September with a briefing on that approach. And then again, this past June, asked you to approve the contracts for Carollo and for Burns and McDonnell. And then now here we are with an update of where we are with the project definition phase. And tell you a little more about what that means, or what we're calling project definition. So it's the opportunity to decide how to optimally reinvest in the water systems rather than letting a future emergency drive things for us. Also to look far ahead, enough far ahead that we don't find ourselves on a dead end and need to expensively change course. You know, going back to Monty's illustration of driving to Colorado, we don't want to get to Topeka and find out there's an ice storm on I-70. We'd rather find that out before we leave, and we can go through New Mexico. There on the right are kind of the steps that we've gone through, and some of those started well before 2020. The facilities evaluation, process review, and regulatory compliance, to some degree, we were doing with the Black and Veatch effort over the last three years. And then we've reviewed those and gone, as I said, from a higher view and also deeper with Carollo and Burns and McDonnell to retouch base on some of those. Right now, we're, you know, closing in on being complete with alternative development and kind of starting on the financing and phasing development of approaches there. So looking at, we'll get into some detail about the water treatment plant and about the CAW raw water line. But I wanted to start first with a little bit of an overview, and that a key part of this is deciding what the pieces are. You know, on the simplest level, replace the CAW line someday, replace the pump station someday, replace the plant, but it's a lot more complex than that. So that's a key part of what we're doing is defining what are the viable pieces to solving this. And what are the current challenges and what are the foreseeable challenges? And before I go into that, I'll kind of just mention a couple of points to clarify, almost definitions. But when you hear us talk about water quality, we do and we will meet the regulations. But if we talk about quality, we're thinking of that over time it becomes, and especially with older equipment, it becomes more expensive and take more effort to achieve those water qualities. And they're also, you always try to maximize secondary standards like taste and odor, things that the customers really notice. You must meet the regs, the primary regulations, but you want to meet those secondaries. And if it becomes, sometimes you may not be able to meet the secondaries in order to meet in the worst case scenario. So when we say water quality, don't think we're thinking meet it or don't. We're thinking we will meet it. How do we exceed that? And how do we meet the secondary type of goals? If we mention safety, does not mean, under one scenario or another, we're not going to sacrifice unsafe working conditions. What it means is that providing a safe working environment may currently, or under some alternative, be more costly and labor intensive. Maybe you've got to have something that should just take one person and be real simple and short. It may take two people, and you may have to fill out a confined space entry form and do some paperwork and just to make sure they stay safe. But if we can do it in a way with less of a burden, that's preferable. The last thing I'll kind of set you up for is a lot of the projects we're talking about, they're going to sound large and they're going to sound costly. But the thing to remember is we're not talking about doing all these things at once. What we're doing is looking at a 50-year life cycle to make sure we make the right investments in the next few months and years, that those get us on the right track. Basically begin with the end in mind. And you'll also see that starting off in the right direction now could save us, tens of millions or more over the next 50 years to have that, money available for other needs in the community. So back on to challenges. We face challenges with the water systems regularly, and we've been managing the assets for years. So the winter storm in February of this year wasn't particularly a novel. It was it was unprecedented, but we're used to facing challenges. That's my point. But it's good as an example because all our customers, indeed all of you, that everybody is familiar with that because we heard about it on the news. We all were affected to some degree or another. So that we came very close to losing water pressure in parts of the system. The root cause of that was essentially seeing summer demands. We were over 13 MGD in demand, which we had not seen in the last 2 summers at least. So that was greater than most of our recent summer peaks in the middle of winter, and exacerbated by some cascading events like the freeze. Call pump station froze twice for short periods, and one of the treatment trains at the water plant froze briefly. Neither of those were catastrophic, but pile them on to what was already a tough situation, and you have cascading events. And so there were 2 reasons that things were not considerably worse. One reason is city staff working very long hours in miserable conditions to fix water line breaks, to get certain things unfrozen, to keep things running and keep checking on them. Some of our communications went down because of the weather, so they might have been making a run out to a tower to see what was really going on. The other thing is Oklahoma State University and their water treatment plant. They were already online, but they diverted or were able to ramp up their production and help support us. So we're very appreciative of their support and our relationship with them. And I know Norman has said it before, multiple times, but I just wanted to take the chance to sincerely thank both of those groups. And also, from watching the news, that we were able to kind of weather that event, no pun intended, better than a lot of our neighbors to the south and Jackson, Mississippi. In fact, that QR code, if you follow it, is about their story and how the cascading events just knocked their system down and how long it took to get it back up online. So the February event just reinforces and makes clear the need to think about big magnitude events as they're going to happen sometime in the future. And the best we can do to prepare for them, I think we should do.
Sure. First of all, I think that's our first QR code in a city council presentation. Yes. So that's fantastic. But I also want to take a second, since you have a couple of folks here from the water treatment plant, Mr. Driscoll and Novotny, right?
Sure. Thomas is our water treatment plant superintendent. James Driscoll is the water utilities director.
Well, since you guys are here, thank you so much for the work that you did in the February store event and keeping that water flowing and keeping all of us up to snuff on that sort of thing. So we really, really, really appreciate that work.
Thanks for adding that in. And the QR code, if you wonder why it's there, if anybody's seeing this handout on paper, they can snap a shot, but hopefully you could on your screen. If you could pause your screen, I would think you'd be able to do it there too if people want more information.
Technology.
Exactly.
It does? It does. Oh, good, thank you.
That's right.
So as I said, we'll have more detail from Tom and David about treatment plant and raw water. What I've got here is just a couple of slides, reiterating some of the key pieces of information about the water treatment plant on there on the left, on the blue side, and then some of the challenges there on the right that we'll have with this particular system. We do know that equipment failures are inevitable in a lot of ways at the treatment plant, in the distribution system, on the raw water system. We have redundancies. We'll talk about, the biggest pump at the raw water treatment, at the raw water plant at Caw has a spare, just like it. So there's two pumps sitting there, and so if one goes down, we've got another. So we've got a lot of contingencies to address equipment failures, and what we work really hard to avoid is a systemic failure, so that say one pump station goes down, hit by lightning, tornado, whatever, another pump station in another pressure zone can support that. Maybe not 100%, but at least keep people with enough water to bathe and cook. And here on this slide, similar details about the raw water delivery system. Just factors about the system and some of the challenges that we've got to deal with. And I would add that that's probably maybe the least resilient part of our system, because it was so expensive. We've got one pump station, one pipeline. So if either of those goes down, we don't have we're building up backups over the years. An agreement with OSU provides some support for that eventuality, but it doesn't provide 100% backup. Our raw water storage at the treatment plant is only 4 million gallons. Sounds like a lot, but since even in the dead of winter we use 5 to 6 gallons, 5 to 6 million, that's not much storage. So those are some of the limitations there. Here I have distribution, and we're not addressing distribution with this effort, but it's worth including for a couple of reasons. One, distribution is closely impacted by the water quality that we put out at the water treatment plant. So we have the opportunity, when we make improvements there, to make a real difference even out into the system. Even, you can see there on the right, we have customers 25 pipe miles away from the plant. So that's a long time to keep the disinfectant residual fresh, and to keep the water quality as good as possible and as stable as possible. The other key thing I might point out here is that there on the bottom left, that we serve in one way or another 15 plus total systems. So it's not just Stillwater, depending on the raw water delivery system and the treatment system. We have raw water customers, Oto Missouri Tribe. Besides, we serve 4 rural water systems, but some of those serve multiple other systems, so subsequent to us. And now some of them are just backups. They don't depend on us all the time. But so that's over 70,000 people impacted by our systems. And now we'll switch and talk in more detail about the water treatment plant, and I'll turn it over to Tom Crowley.
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Mayor, Council, thank you for your attention this evening. I want to acknowledge our teaming partner, Burns & McDonnell, who was very integral in all of this work. So, on the water treatment plant, when you look at a water treatment system, well, I want to put it in perspective for you. So the plant was built in the 1980s. So there you see on the very left-hand side the time, and then on the y-axis you see the number of regulations developed during that time. That's primary drinking water regulations. The point of this slide is that when the treatment plant was built in 1985, you had about 20 regulations. Today there are over 95. So in a period of 40 years, you have 70 regulations that have been developed, of over 90 primary drinking water standards. And just for you that like the QR codes, we have another one for you. So there's a lot of acronyms here and a lot of regulations. You can scan the code and it will take you to a website that has all of those definitions on it. But the point is that Thomas and his staff at the water plant have done an excellent job in meeting or exceeding all of these regulations. They currently do that now, and they plan to continue in the future. But as Bill pointed out, it becomes more and more difficult with an 80s technology that is continuously aging. So when we look at water treatment plant processes, we also look at not only what are the current regulations, but what are some potential future regulations. I think we're all aware there's some increasing pressure from a regulatory standpoint on corrosion control and distribution residual stability from events that have happened in Flint, Michigan and Washington, D.C. Those are all currently on the regulators' minds. As well as there's some increasing pressures on your water supplies, the cyanotoxins and neurotoxins, personal care product, endocrine disruptors, pharmaceutical compounds. Those are all on the regulatory focus right now. There's also heavy metals, particularly as it pertains to groundwater. And then PFAS and PFOS, which are components that are in common household items that are showing up in water supplies like Teflon. So those are all on the regulators' minds for now and in the future. So when you're looking at water treatment systems, you want to look at not only what are the current regulations, but what are those future. Because the point of that first slide is that they never go down. They always go up. So how we have identified alternatives, Bill mentioned there's some very good facility evaluations that were done on the water plant to determine, what are the strengths of the water plant? What are the good bones, and as Monty referred to, what are the bad bones in the water treatment plant? What are some of the things that could be improved? We look at a cornucopia of alternatives. We look at about all of the potential treatment alternatives. We want to be as comprehensive as possible when we're looking at potential changes in a water treatment process. We look at how we can integrate that with the water treatment plant. We may look at how we integrate it without the water treatment plant. And we look at it from a fatal flaw. We take that 15 and narrowed it down to 5. For example, membrane technology is a very viable technology in a lot of situations, particularly on the coasts. You go to California, you go to Florida, there's a lot of membranes. When you start getting into the heart and to the interior of the U.S., particularly where you don't have a lot of capability to do deep well injection, like Oklahoma, where there's increasing regulations on that deep well injection, that becomes cost prohibitive. So you look at that and say, well, that's probably not something that we consider that to be a fatal flaw. So you take those 15 treatment alternatives and you narrow it down to, in our case, we narrowed it down to what we thought were 5 viable alternatives. And from those 5, you go down and get a little bit more granularity by comparing those 5 alternatives on a cost-benefit analysis. And so if you take a look at the cost-benefit criteria there on your right, we were looking at and comparing these 5 alternatives with respect to water quality. As Bill mentioned before, it's not, hey, everyone will meet the regulations. What is better and more flexible at meeting those future regulations, okay? Flexibility, what is better at handling a different varying water quality from Kaw Lake or perhaps a different source? Operations and maintenance, Bill mentioned it earlier. One of the weaknesses of the existing plant is in order for Thomas to go and look at his filters, he needs 2 other people so a person can go down and take a look at the filtration system. Now in a modern design, you have stairs and you have not a complete free access that doesn't require other people to watch what you're doing. So does it have an enhanced ability to operate and an ease of maintenance? Site management and public acceptance. One of the things that we looked at, particularly with the membrane technologies, would the public accept a deep well injection system if we had a membrane? Would it accept a discharge into Cimarron River of the brine resulting from the membrane process? Another thing is risk and reliability and cost. So how reliable and how redundant can a water plant be from these combination of treatment alternatives? So we looked at the cost and benefit analysis of those 5 alternatives and came up with 3 preferred alternatives selected for a even higher level where we're generating costs, we're looking at life cycle, we're looking at each one of these in more detail. So this just illustrates some of the fatal flaw analysis that we did. So that represents some of the cornucopia of alternatives that we were looking at. We funneled it down to 5 viable alternatives. One of the other things that you might look into a fatal flaw is, for example, hey, this technology is great, but it's never been applied at this scale before. It's down here at the 1 million gallon a day, and we were looking at 24. So if we don't have a technology that's been applied at that scale, we eliminated it based on a fatal flaw. Another example might be granulated activated carbon. A lot of communities are starting to use that as a kind of a catch-all for the future regulations. One of the things that we analyzed with your water is the life cycle of that GAC, and it didn't make sense from our standpoint, from an extreme cost standpoint, that was eliminated. So extreme costs, never been operated at that scale, never been applied before. That type of fatal flaw is what was used. So now we have our 3 alternatives. And I want to define what those are, and we'll go and show kind of overviews of what it looks like at the plant. So the first option is looking at a full plant replacement, that where we take all of the key processes that are at the plant right now and replace them with a modern design, a modern treatment concept. The other one is, hey, let's take what you have at the existing plant and let's bring it up to modern standards. Let's invest some money in what's already at that plant to bring it up to the modern standards so we can meet those future regulations and our water quality goals. And then the third one is kind of a mixture, is, hey, let's select the ones we think that will work well with a new treatment technology or be able to be integrated with a new technology, and we call that our hybrid alternative. So I'll show you what each one of those looks like. So this is, again, the full replacement alternatives. This is an overview, kind of a bird's eye view of what's at your water plant right now. So the green indicates new facilities. The yellow indicates old facilities that will be demolished, that will not be reused. And the kind of the pinkish looks like a repurpose of existing facilities. So for example, we know that in this option, we would provide a new treatment drain, meaning a new treatment process with new filtration, ozone, and then a repurpose of the existing clarifiers for backwash for those filters. We would also include a new softening process, and it has a little bit of a distinct advantage over the current softening process, and I'll go into it just a tiny bit of detail. So the existing process utilizes lime and generates a lot of solids, okay? It generates a solids that's anywhere between, when dried, 30 to 50%. That means it's 70% to 50% water. The new pellet softening process is a modern design. It's a fluidized bed reactor that generates hard pellets that are about 97% pure calcium carbonate. And Monty will kind of get a little bit into what pellet softening could bring, but it greatly reduces the volume of solids that you have to handle at the water plant. So it's a more modern lime softening design. And then we also wanted to give an ability to expand future needs. So this, for example, is a 24 million gallon a day plant. All three alternatives you see have that capability. Now, what we did is, this is our 20-year life cycle cost plant. To get to 50, you have to expand another 6 MGD approximately to go to about 30. Okay, that'll be important when I show you these later slides. So again, bird's eye view. This is a replacement alternative where we're looking at replacing most of the process with new modern processes and new buildings that support that process. So the second alternative is a complete rehabilitation alternative. Again, this is an overview of your existing plant. There are some new facilities that need to be integrated because we're actually changing the process a little bit. We're adding and augmenting that process. There's going to be some facilities that we need to demolish because they're outdated or unable to use in this option. And then we're repurposing most of the plant. So when we took a look at your filters, for example, the filters, they're structurally sound. But what's in them, they need to be completely ripped apart and rebuilt, not only because they need to be brought up to modern standards, but they also need to be expanded for access. So I mentioned Thomas and his guys have to send a person down to go look at the filters. Well, in this modern design, the access will be there so they don't need two or three people to go down and take a look at their filters. It's just a modern, practical design. And it involves a new build of a chemical feed. Again, this is still the old process which generates a lot of solids. It's a lime softening process. We're going to need a new lime feed system and ozone systems. And then it actually, because we're pretty confined on the existing space, it's quite expensive to go from the 24 MGD to the 30 MGD because of the confined space of trying to reuse all that older equipment. And then finally, we have the hybrid alternative, which again kind of makes it use of some of the strengths which we thought were the solids contact clarifiers, which are where the lime reaction occurs. Again, the new facilities are in green. That involves a new ozone and replacement of the old filters. So if you take a look at the orange, or I'm sorry, the yellow, the demolished filters are shown in as far as demo. So you're kind of doing a hybrid here between a brand new treatment process and reusing some of the existing infrastructure. It would have a better ability because a majority of the process expansion needs to occur in the filtration process. It would have a better ability to expand to meet the 24 to 30 MGD future needs from 20 year to 50 year. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain this slide, but this takes a look at alternative 1. Remember, that's a complete replacement. Alternative 2 is a complete rehab, and alternative 3 was that hybrid. What we did is we looked at the total life cycle costs, and what I mean by life cycle, I mean capital costs, I mean the cost to staff it, I mean the cost to buy chemicals to treat it, to dispose of the sludge that's generated from the process. I'm talking about also to rehabilitate if we're using, for example, if I'm reusing a valve that's been there since the 1980s, eventually within that 20 years, I got to replace it. But if I start with a new plant, then I don't have to do that. So that total comprehensive life cycle cost is there for a 20-year period. And remember how I indicated we looked at benefits, water quality, flexibility, operation and maintenance, public acceptance. We scored each one of those alternatives based on those non-economic values. And that is the benefit that you see that's on your y-axis. So if you look at the upper left-hand corner, the highest benefit with the lowest cost is in that upper left-hand corner, and that, in this case, looks to be the replacement, the complete replacement of the water plant. If you, again, we also wanted to examine it under a 50-year long-term lens. So we did the same exercise going from 24 to 30 MGD and the life cycle cost, and you can see that the replacement option still provides the greatest benefit at the lowest overall life cycle cost. And actually, if you see the difference between the two slides, 1 and 2, there's a little bit of separation that comes between the two. As I said before, the rehab cost to go from 24 to 30 is higher than the replacement option. So David Barth will come up and talk about the raw water system. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.
Can I just stop for a second and just say, obviously I was an early childhood teacher, so pictures are great. But these really do help in the 3 different ways that you explain this to really give us a visual for what each of these plans would entail. So thank you for doing that.
Very well. It was an enjoyable team to work with.
Good evening, I'm David Barth with City Engineering, and like Tom said, I'm going to talk to you about the raw water delivery system. The raw water delivery system consists of the Caw Reservoir, the Caw Pump Station, which is just south of the reservoir, you can see in this figure here, the 36-mile pipeline that extends from the Caw Reservoir down to the water treatment plant, and then additionally the storage that we have at the water treatment plant. Bill mentioned earlier it's 4 million gallons. It's a large steel tank. It's a minimal amount of storage, and if something goes wrong, then that's the water we have. With the exception of, if we work something out with, getting some additional support from OSU or having some water in our treated distribution system, excuse me. But it doesn't last very long. These are some general facts about our raw water delivery system. The Caw Reservoir, thankfully, has enough water. We have the water rights to meet our needs, but it is our sole supply. So what does that mean? That means if our Caw pump station or our Caw pipeline are out of service for maintenance or for an emergency, we have no other supply of water. And so we have a limited supply or limited amount of time when that happens. It also limits us on when we can actually work on our system, the raw water system. We have to usually limit it to periods of the year when we have very low demand and our guys are having to work on the line when there's maybe pressure in the line. So there's a lot of less than ideal situations that we have to work on our system because we don't have but one supply. The Caw pump station is currently sized to deliver 14.4 million gallons per day, which is interesting. Our water treatment plant can actually treat 18 million gallons per day. So what that says is that our treatment ability is limited by the water that we can deliver to the plant from the pump station and the pipeline. The existing raw system, raw water system as it stands now does not have the capacity to meet demand in the year 2070. We'll have to have either another supply, we'll have to have potentially larger pipelines, additional pump station capacity increases, those types of things. Looking at this slide, we're still assessing the pipeline condition, but what we know is that we've had at least 20 leaks between 1981 and 2012, and we didn't transpose 2012 into 2021. There was a report that we had, and we had at least 20 leaks between 1981 and 2012 in the raw water pipeline, and those were repaired. We averaged 2 to 3 leaks per year. We've had 3 leaks so far this year, and the leak frequency seems to be increasing. We know that our cathodic protection system is not functional. We have another consultant, Fries and Nichols, who's working on a project to assess that, and we've already had them out there in the field, and we're waiting on their findings and some additional work that they're going to do. But our goal is to get that system up and running as soon as possible. And we also know that the interior liner, which is coal tar epoxy, has degraded, and the interior pipeline surface, the steel, is exposed to interior corrosion. We don't know what the severity of that corrosion is. That's more condition assessment that we plan to do. The orange circles on this slide over the pipeline, and it says surge zones. Those are actually zones that were identified in another study. So it's not areas of high pressure necessarily, but what it means is that when the caw pump station turns on or turns off, before we had variable frequency drives, there would be a pressure wave, and the pressure wave in those areas could have caused further damage to the pipeline. So in I think it was 2016, I have to refer back to Bill's slide, we installed our variable frequency drives at the pump station to help with that. But we don't know in those areas what damage was done prior to that. And so that's part of the future condition assessment that we're going to do, is to look at our pipeline in those zones. So we may dig up certain areas and take ultrasonic thickness measurements or do other types of non-destructive testing. So like I said, the pipeline condition assessment is ongoing. We've worked really hard this summer with Carollo and Burns and McDonnell. We've identified 11 alternatives that have various components to them, whether it's replacing segments of the caw pipeline, rehabilitating, let's say slip lining segments of the caw pipeline, installation of an intermediate booster pump station somewhere between the water treatment plant and Caw Lake, which would lower pressures and increase capacity. We could rehab or replace the caw pump station if we needed to increase capacity. The other thing that we're looking at, so those 11 alternatives, we're still looking at those. Burns & Mac has provided us with some costing on those, but we're still working through refining all of that data. The other thing that we've looked at is, let's look at an approach where we could institute a strategic pipeline replacement and repair program. If we had the ability to take our pipeline down for longer periods of time, and we had materials on hand, we had construction details in place for given depths, let's say that the pipeline is buried, during an emergency or during a period of maintenance, we could go out and take care of those things, either with our own staff or having an on-call contractor do it. To do that, we really need additional storage, because otherwise it gets really expensive and you're constrained to that winter time. And so having additional raw water storage just makes sense for us to be able to continue to maintain our line properly and to have a safe environment for the people that are doing that. So that's why I've got at the bottom there, invest in additional raw water storage, which leads into this slide. So we looked at different alternatives with our team, and these are the 3 alternatives that we have shortlisted. And they kind of vary from left to right in terms of initial capital costs. So the number one, it would be a lower cost. But they also, number one, gives you the least amount of flexibility, which is the Yost, we call it the Yost Road option, but we basically are showing we could build an in-ground reservoir west of the water treatment plant, let's say, and you can see there's 4 cells there, so we would build 2 cells now, and then we would need to build another 2 cells to the north to meet future demand. But this would be a pretty simple way to store raw water. It would be able to potentially gravity feed back to the water treatment plant. So we would pump water from Caw Lake through a pipeline to the west of our treatment plant into this reservoir. And then whenever we need to take our Caw pipeline down for maintenance, or to take the Caw pump station down for maintenance, then we would draw water out of this reservoir. But when it's empty, we're out of water there again. So, you know, we're limited in whatever we put in it is what we can use. The next stop.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But I can't read it. How many more MGD storage does that give us?
It doesn't say there on the slide. So I'd have to ask our engineering team what our storage.
Yeah, so it's 95 million gallons for 2040 and then 190 total.
So 95 million gallons to meet 20. So the first 2 cells would be 95 million gallons.
Okay.
And then 190 million gallons. Did you say that?
That'd be total, so
Okay.
95.
So thank you, Erica. Hopefully you're not going to ask me the volume of Boomer Lake. I don't know that. Okay. Anyway, Yost Road, what we're calling Yost Road here, gives us storage that we can, certainly use. It's a simple system, but it doesn't give us a backup supply. Boomer Lake would be the next option that we could do. So it's a little bit more expensive than the in-ground storage reservoir, but Boomer Lake offers us the option of being a secondary supply. So we would have, again, water that would come from Caw Lake, from our pipeline there. We would flow that into Boomer Lake, and we would keep Boomer Lake full. And then during periods where we might need raw water for maintenance or for an emergency, we could take water out of Boomer Lake. Now, we would have to have a pump station to be able to do that, that would be at the lake, and then we would pipe it back up to the water treatment plant. The other thing I should mention with all of these alternatives is that if we have storage, it allows us to defer capacity improvements to our Caw pipeline and our Caw pump station, and it just, that's just another one of the perks of this. So instead of having to go out now and improve the Caw pump station, increase capacity, or increase the capacity of the Caw pipeline, we could possibly pull water from both sources, from Caw Lake and one of these, during a period of high demand in the summer. So it gives us a lot more flexibility. There again, you wouldn't be able to pull very long from the Yost Road. When I say very long, it may be a week. So Lake Mcmurtry, there again, is pretty much like Boomer Lake, but Lake Mcmurtry, you've been out there, is a lot bigger lake than Boomer, but it is farther. So we would have the same thing. We would have a pipeline that would take water from Caw Lake through a pipeline. Our current Caw pump station would be able to pump it all the way to Mcmurtry. And then and we would keep the lake full, and then in periods of need, we would turn around, it's the same pipeline, and we would pump backwards through the pipeline back to the water treatment plant. Now, I want to mention that both of these scenarios, what we've looked at is that, we're not going to impact recreation at those lakes. So all of the modeling that our engineers didn't envision that we would be taking the lake down to, inches. We asked them to minimally drop the lake levels during these periods and look at what the impact would and the benefit would give us. I think that's all I have on raw water storage alternatives. Do you have any questions before I turn it over to Monty?
Just briefly, so the additional pipeline you'd have to build
Yes,
for any of those would just be from the terminal at the plant
yes.
to that new source, and that would just be a two-way pipe?
Yes, for both Boomer and Lake McMurtry, well, and for Yost. It would be I think it would be for Yost. But yeah, it would be a two-way, one single pipeline, and so you would, the call pump station would go ahead and pump it to those lakes, and then we would have another pump station at the lake that would pump it back. We can't gravity flow from McMurtry or Boomer back to the water treatment plant because they're too low.
But it's all in series, there's no parallel circuit.
Correct.
Pipeline.
Exactly. The other thing that I will mention that on that, you said parallel, so it just made me think of something. But on the call pipeline, we do have some areas that are difficult to repair. Like, for example, we have a couple of crossings underneath the Arkansas River. So as part of our 11 scenarios that were looked at, those include additional sections of pipe going in those critical, or I would say more difficult to repair areas, like under the turnpike. And so by us building new pipe there now and then taking the old pipeline out of service, we're essentially, meeting our goals of that 50-year plan, because that would last longer than 50 years if we put a new pipeline there underneath the river. So that is included in those options.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Monty to wrap it up.
Well, he has all the solutions to these problems, right?
I want to add a little bit to David on the Boomer Lake, since we started talking about pipelines. On the Boomer Lake option, one of the alternatives, one of the options on that as well, is to get the water from Boomer Lake back up to the treatment plant. You got to build a pipeline. Well, it turns out in the future, the finished water line that we have in place now has either got to have a parallel pipeline or be enlarged for future demand. So maybe if that were the option, we would look at building the larger finished water line now and then convert the existing line to the raw water line. And would that be a better overall use of our dollars over a 50-year life? That's a little more in the weeds than we intended to get, but we started there, and I wanted to make sure we address that. I want to start off first by expressing my thanks to the team. And the amount of work that you have seen tonight was done over the last since June, since you approved this in June. So about 3 months. Normally, this type of an assessment would take 9 months and would cost considerably more, obviously, for the time. We challenged the team and our own staff to shorten the timeline for a variety of reasons. And, I was kind of met with blank stares and a lot of skepticism, and they have performed admirably. David has done a wonderful job managing the project. He has asked the right questions at the right time from the consultants. He's challenged them at the right times. Each one of our consultants has felt free to challenge each other and to challenge staff. It has been a very productive working group, which has allowed us to do what we've done. And the key to that was the fatal flaw analysis. There's some very good treatment techniques in there that are gold standard, if you will. And we could have spent some time and money exploring those. But we also said we've got some of the smartest people in the business, both from design and construction and operation, and can we really afford those? We're happy to go back and look at them, and one of those is the granulated activated carbon. It's a wonderful system, but it's going to be very expensive to operate, and we have a lot of needs. So, wanted to make that point. I also want to give a little bit of history about water in Stillwater, and please bear with me as we go through this. Some of you know that the original settlement was at Boomer Creek and Stillwater Creek, and that was because every time those folks would come to this area, there was still water in the creek, regardless of what time of the year they came. Then, when we finally were open for settlement, that was the original water source. Then there were some wells. But by 1892, community figured out we didn't have enough water. So they dammed up West and East Boomer Creeks right above present-day 6th Avenue. That was our water supply. And 1894, OSU started becoming short on water. In 1900, we completed our first water treatment plant at 4th Avenue, called the 4th Avenue Water Treatment Plant. There was also a power plant there at one time. And we began to sell water to OSU. 1914, there was a big fire on campus, some of you are aware of, which demonstrated the need for additional water. In the late 20s, the city constructed Boomer Lake, built a 12-inch pipeline from the lake to the water treatment plant. In the 30s, OSU began the process that led to Lake Carl Blackwell. In 49, the pipeline and their 6 million gallon plant was completed, and they began supplying both OSU and the city of Stillwater with water. That was expanded in 68 to 12 million gallons. 60s was also the time when the community realized that Lake Carl Blackwell was not going to be enough water, and started looking at CAW. But there had to be something to bridge, and that's when we built Mcmurtry. And OSU continued to treat the water. 1980, CAW Reservoir was completed. We brought the pipeline to Stillwater. We got 50 million gallons of water rights per day. We constructed our water treatment. Now here's the interesting thing. And each one of those instances where the city of Stillwater had to come up with money, and this was from a research of the news press articles, their archives for a project I did years ago. But each one of those instances, there were three things that the public said. It costs too much, we can't afford it, I don't want the town to grow. Every one of them. It's in our DNA. I would remind you of the slide we showed at the beginning, that the 6.5 MGD was the limit that we had. And that included OSU's. That 6.5 was the limit of supply. Our average daily usage now is over 7, and that does not include OSU's, 2 million. A few more important points I want you to take from the presentation. We have options for keeping the system going. It wasn't as though the folks back in the 80s didn't understand the need for terminal storage. It was OSU's plant was 12 MGD, it was robust. It could take care of the city's needs at that time. We've grown, they've grown. How much longer we continue to do that, we're not sure. As we've said, they've helped us out in the past. We've helped them out in the past. It's been a reciprocal agreement. If we were to have a major break in the summertime and high demand, it would be very challenging for that system to keep up, and we would have to be rationing water. So additional storage is vital for the flexibility in the future, and will have to be one of our top priorities. That also, as David alluded to, helps on delaying upsizing the system. Because when you think about it, if we've got 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, some number of weeks of water at the raw water plant, at the raw water storage, and we can bring down 14 million out of the pipeline, and we're peaking at 18, well, then we can pull 4 out of storage and not have to build a pipeline for 18 million gallons for a week or 2 weeks. So it's a good use of our resources and our assets. The other point I wanted to make was in the life cycle cost analysis. Tom did an excellent job of showing you how over time the difference between 1 and 2 grew. Those are significant dollars. And later on, we'll be in a position to quantify those, but from a qualitative standpoint, we know that those are going to be significant. I think what it does show very graphically and very pointedly that if we continue on the path that we're on right now, where we just kind of work it in as best we can into our cash flow, we will spend substantially more money over the next 50 years than if we take a deep breath and look at something now. So where are we going from, what are we doing next? So today we gave you the update. We're going to come to you in October with some financing opportunities and some phasing possibilities. In November and December, you will see, we will ask you to approve some engineering contracts to start working on what we're calling confirmed improvements. These are projects that we put on hold that already have had some expenditure in engineering. They have project numbers. We have funding sources identified for them, but we have confirmed that they're either good to go as they were originally conceived, in that any one of these 3 options, these will fit. And that will be true on the residual solids handling system. The caustic feed system is something that we need now. That will kind of replace the lime system. It costs less than the original lime system, but we will not recoup all of that cost in any of the 3 systems. We can reuse some of the pumps, we can reuse some of the tanks, but we're going to lose some piping costs, but we got to stay in business. The other system, we may be in a position to start the finished water pump station. Again, that's an approved project, and that fits in any of the other scenarios, and actually helps us because the new pump station would be one of the first items we would do in any of these options, because we need to move it further away from the clear wells so that we have more room to work on those. In fact, that's one of the reasons the costs for the rehab options are so high, is we have to figure out ways to keep the plant in operation and the rooms to mobilize and the crews to work and still keep the other plants going is very difficult. And then the last item will be the cathodic protection system on the pipeline. Then in the first quarter of 2022, we hope to have the recommended action plan that will include possibilities of funding and phasing and all those good things, and we can start making hard decisions. And we are all here to answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you, Monty, and to the whole team for the presentation. This is just fantastic in terms of the information and the organization and kind of covering what are, I know, very complicated and complex systems and making them understandable to people who don't do anything with water systems except turn on a tap. And so I certainly appreciate the information at this point, and I will ask the council if they have any questions at this point.
Well, I've had, I think through the numerous discussions we've had regarding our water treatment facility and delivery systems across the last year, I think that there's no question that we need to start getting some improvements into the works. I've had a few people comment that, why are we looking at this so intently after a unprecedented winter storm? I did not realize when I started my time on council how common unprecedented events would be. We had an unprecedented water, rainstorm in 2017.
2019.
Oh, 2019, excuse me. An unprecedented global pandemic going on right now, and an unprecedented winter storm earlier this year. So, like I said, I think the discussion on whether or not improvements need to be made is a fairly moot point at this point. The question, of course, now is how the best road forward. And these are complicated systems. Like you said at the beginning of this presentation, whoever it was, that we do Bill, I think it was you, that we do a pretty high level, high altitude look at this. And I shudder to think all of the details that you guys as a team have poured over and thought about through all of this. So that is certainly appreciated. Thank you for dumbing it down for us tonight, because I know that's exactly what you had to do. And so I just like to say that I'm interested to see what the recommendations coming up in the next several months are going to look like, and where we go from here. But to answer some of the questions that I've received, throughout the last year about some of these discussions we've had, there is no question that we need to update our water infrastructure. So again, thank you all for everything you have done to put this together so quickly, and thank you for making it somewhat understandable to a dumb neurologist like me. So appreciate you.
Monty, how do you, I know it's probably going to be challenging doing the financing opportunities and phasing, but I think one of the things that we all want to be mindful of is we are going to get a lot of questions from the public, and for those that are just going to want to know specifics. I guess my question for you, or I guess the photos of each, or the pictures of each of your three options are really good. If there's a way that you could explain the financing as you think about presenting it to us in these terms, so that as we think about what each of these, what's new, when we repurpose, how much each of those are going to cost when you talk about the financing, I think that does help those of us on council and then the public too, just kind of understand the financing part of it and how that looks. Is that going to be a very challenging, I know it's going to be a challenging part, but do you foresee?
It is going to be a challenging part. We have purposely not talked about cost tonight,
right,
because we have looked at cost from the standpoint of a base of 24 MGD, so that we could compare all the alternatives equally. We've looked at life cycle costs that way. And we've looked at if money were no object, what would we do? Right. So that we could compare those equally. Of course, we know money is an object. So we've got to do some hard work of, okay, what's a nice to have, what's a must have. So we have that work to do. We didn't, until about a week ago, really get the cost narrowed down to where we could start from a staff standpoint, working with Melissa and her team as to, okay, how are we going to fund this? Melissa, Christy, and I and others will probably meet tomorrow afternoon and start having those discussions and sharpening pencils. Christy and I have already had some discussions in that regard. It's probably going to come down to, okay, we're going to have to make some hard choices on which ones of these we do first. Maybe we spend some money on this system to get it reliable, and then really build this one good, and then come back and work on this one later. It also depends on what kind of outside funding we might get from grants, and we've been in contact with our congressional delegation and have some things working in stimulus bills that could be very beneficial. We know of a grant opportunity that we learned about this week that would help us with that as well. Fortunately, it'd probably be a year before we knew about that. But it also takes a long time to put these projects
Right.
together. So the answer to your question is, it depends.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
But we are going to break that down
Okay.
into, kind of like we've done this discussion, what makes sense.
Great.
And there will be some hard choices of, if you do this, it's going to cost this, but you give this and this up.
Right.
Like we do in everything.
Well, definitely showing the 20-year and the 50-year difference was eye-opening also.
Exactly.
I mean, so.
But the nice thing about life cycle costs are, especially when you include the O&M costs, is what you're going to be spending that money. You're either going to be spending it in operation and maintenance and replacing old valves, or you can be making a payment on it, something new,
Right.
if you're going to keep your system viable.
Yeah, I think the long-term life cycle cost, looking at it that way, is going to be really important, because I assume if you look at just the hard cost of replacement versus rehab, it's going to look different, right? If we just compare what's it cost us now versus what does it cost us over the next 20 to 50 years.
Actually, they're pretty equal, even on first cost.
Really?
Because it's so expensive
Yeah.
to work next to an existing plant.
On the
Oh,
on a
what-
new replacement, is it you mentioned, or you talked about how you looked at all these different treatment possibilities or options. So with building a new plant, is it going to be pretty much locked into one of those treatment types?
Not necessarily, because the treatment type really depends on the source of your quality of your water. And certainly across the country, membrane technology is becoming more and more prevalent. Because there's some options for that, and in some situations, it's not a problem to get rid of the brine. We decided early on that, maybe it's by default. I don't think there was anybody in the room wanting to come up here and try to make a case for a deep well disposal system. That we just don't think that's a good alternative. The kind of on that same vein in terms of benefits and public acceptance, the nice thing about the pellet softening is you get these nice little granules that you can easily grind, or use them as they are, and we can use them in our road stabilization. They are great for agricultural lime, for soil modification in agriculture. There's other uses for them, and they're very high grade, and they have significant value. Now, are we going to get rich off of it? Nope. But it's a waste product. Instead of disposing, you're reusing and recycle, if you will.
Yeah.
And we think that's a big plus.
Okay. I love the discussion of the raw water storage with Boomer and Mcmurtry and those options out there. I remember in the very first discussion we had about this a few months ago, some of those options being presented, and the idea of kind of diversifying the source at some level, because with one pipeline and one reservoir, we are kind of at the mercy of what happens between here and Caw. And so I think there's a lot of value in looking at using one of those, closer bodies of water potentially to help store water.
And the really nice thing is, in terms of recreational use, during a drought, when those lake levels would normally go down, we're keeping them full. Unless we have some kind of an emergency and we need to use them.
Yeah.
But the water level would have gone down anyway. So over time, we're actually enhancing the recreational use of the lake.
Anything else, counselors? Well, again, lots of great information,
Yes.
lots of work still to do, I'm sure, and we
Yes.
look forward to hearing from you all again on what the next steps will be.
Thank you for your time.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
We have nothing else on our agenda for the evening. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the city council study session. Please vote. With a vote of 4-0, we're now adjourned. Thank you all.